Welcome to Cosmic Divide, episode 53. Today, I am joined by no one. It's just me, because again, today we're going to do your questions, Cosmic Divide. You guys have asked me some questions on my Discord, and I'm going to answer them. I did this, the first episode I did without Elevated, when he flew off to Global Esports, was one of these, right, where it was just me, and, you know, you guys asking me some questions, and I figured, hey, you know, stage 2 is about to start. Seems like a good time, you know, 6 months has passed or whatever, 7 months. Seems like a good time to, you know, just do the same thing again and, like, you know, have a bit of a different episode, right? Because, you know, you've asked some interesting questions. I'm going to answer them. Now, if you did ask a question, I did get quite a few, so I'm not going to quite have time to get to all of them, I don't think. And also some of them weren't so much about Valorant. So if you asked a question that wasn't so much about Valorant, it's probably not going to make it into the video just here or to the podcast. But I still appreciate the question overall. But we are going to answer more so the Valorant related ones. But thank you for asking a question nonetheless. Now, it is a TMV, you know, led venture here. So you are just going to have to deal with like low stakes, low quality overall here, because this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to just do this. We're going to just do this, and I'm going to, you know, put the questions there at the bottom and then just scroll on Discord. There are no fancy graphics here. It's just me. So, first question, and again, I don't know your name here, but you'll know who you are if you ask this question. TMV, who do you think makes a Paper Rex-esque run, that isn't easy to say, to champions? Now, you say 2 champions. Obviously, Paper Rex won Toronto, but I assume you mean in terms of like Paper Rex obviously went on a run just to make it to Toronto, right? Obviously, then they went on to win it, but I assume that you don't mean that, you know, who do you think is going to be bad and then really good and then actually win champs as well? I hope you don't mean that, because obviously winning champions probably not going to be so easy. But let's go through the regions, right? When you think about this question and kind of what's overall going on, I'm gonna just pull up the points standings here for the different regions, because obviously champs, you know, you qualify through points, so you can see there, for instance, in Americas, G2 are already there. Now, obviously, if you don't get in on points, then you have to finish in the top 2 of your region. You have to finish in the top 2 teams of the region. Okay, so that's important to think about and keep in your mind. What's interesting about Americas here, as you can see, is you've got G2 and Sentinels, and then a huge, I mean, you've got a massive gap from G2 to Sentinels, but, you know, like, those two should be pretty good. I mean, G2 have already made it, but Sentinels 2, you would think, like, even if they don't finish in the top 2, they're definitely going to make it, right? And the thing is, though, then it's very open, right? This is a region that is extremely open from then on, right? Where really any of those teams, so I think Americas is probably the most wide open in terms of, you know, figuring out who's going to actually make it, because it's just, you know, completely up for grabs, basically, for both 3rd and 4th place. Like, if G2 plays Sen in the grand final, which has been the other 2 Americas grand finals, the 2 teams are going to make it on points, and they're probably, it might come down to tiebreakers, it might be all sorts of crazy stuff, right? So I think with this one, when you're looking at this, again, we've watched these teams play once. I personally would say after their first performance, 100 Thieves, looking pretty decent, right? In terms of, like, they could, I like where they are, right? But also, like, a Cloud9 also, I think, you know, could be a decent shout. Obviously, Crew are looking decent. I mean, EG are there as well, right? In terms of the teams that aren't here as well, right? Like, we saw Loud obviously win their first game, which I think, you know, could Loud do it? I know Shio's been banging on about Loud quite a lot. Like, could they do it? Like maybe, right? So I think Americas is pretty tough to call overall. I would probably say, for me, the likes of 100 Thieves and Cloud9 are kind of my dark horses that I would go for, but maybe you would go in a different direction. Let's quickly come to China, which is, you know, very close, right? There isn't like a G2 here. You know, it is very close between a lot of the teams, and, you know, EDG are looking pretty rough. Obviously, Wolves are looking pretty rough. I think BLG and XLG, you know, look decent enough to get there, but then again, you've got the other teams in here, you know, you maybe could do it. I think FPX would be my team that, you know, right now I think is looking like a pretty good team overall. We know that they've got talent, of course, so they would probably be my team that I'm, you know, feeling decent about overall. My hope for Wolves, I guess, is that, you know, my hope for Wolves is that EDG, XLG, Billy all lock in, and, you know, like, Trace don't win any more games for the rest of the stage, and Wolves sneak in 4th, I guess, or maybe, you know, manage to win their last 2 games, and then, you know, get onto 11 points and hope that that's enough, right? Like that, I guess that's what I would hope, but yeah, that's not easy necessarily there in China, but I think FBX would be your one there that's, you know, got potential to go on a run and make it. In EMEA here, again, Fnatic should be pretty good. They haven't officially made it on points, but if they win a couple more games, they will have done so. They're almost certainly going to get in one way or another. And I think in EMEA, you know, you are looking at a top 3 here. You know, in those top 3 just there, you see there is a bit of a gap as well. And so EMEA is more for 4th spot, I think, overall, whether that's those teams making it on points or whether it's them finishing in the top 2. You know, I think that those top 3 definitely will make it. For me, there's probably a couple options here. I don't feel good about Vitality, despite the fact that they are sitting 4th right now. I think it's between those 2 Turkish teams. You see there, BBL and FUT, with BBL being kind of the favorite. And then Karmine Corp. I think that those are the 3 teams that you're looking at there. My bold prediction is it's going to be FUT, which it does feel like a bold prediction because I think most people would have them as the clear 3rd favorite out of those teams, but I think that those 3 are the teams. And then finally in Pacific, this is what it's looking like right now. Obviously, PaperX, it's looking pretty good for. The points here is super interesting, right? Like, this is the thing for all of the other Pacific teams, is obviously it's crazy, right? Like, DRX won kickoff, I think, right? So DRX won kickoff, T1 won Bangkok, RRQ won Stage 1, and PaperX won Toronto, and Gen.G have kind of been just the most consistent team throughout the entire year. So it's a very, very strange, you know, it's an extremely strange group of teams, right? In terms of like the points have just gone crazy in this region. So if you're not in those top 5, you know, you're probably not making it on points, right? Almost certainly. So you're going to have to finish the top 2, which does make it very tough, right? Because it's not like those teams in and of themselves as well, like they aren't bad, right? Like none of those teams are like completely useless. So I would say most likely Pacific isn't going to have any outside run. Talon are probably the most likely of the ones outside, but I think 4 of those 5 will probably end up going, in my opinion, because, you know, again, some of them might need to finish in the top 2 because one of them is going to finish 5th, right? So they'll still be heavily competitive. Maybe PaperX can just, you know, win 5 games in the group stage and then, you know, be fine on points either way. But the rest of them, it probably won't necessarily be the case that is the case. So yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting. But I think that 4 of those 5, I think, just will end up going. Okay, let's move back, shall we? Move back to the Discord and the questions. So overall, I guess the most unlikely team that I think will make it is FUT, I suppose. That's gonna be my hot take. Let's scroll down here to no one who asked, if a chance ever came to you to start coaching a tier 1 team, any region, would you take it? Well, the first thing is, talking about the regions, is it would obviously depend on what region it was, right? I almost certainly wouldn't go to China or Pacific. It's just too far away, different language, you know, all that stuff. Too much for me. Too much for me. So probably rule out that. EMEA, yeah, maybe. America's more of a doubt, particularly as we currently stand. But, you know, maybe. I wouldn't completely rule it out. The thing is that I would say is, like, right now, like, it would have to be, you know, I mean, like all things in life, really, right? Like, if it gave me a significant pay increase, yeah, I would consider it. If it gave me a slight pay increase, no, I wouldn't do it, right? Because it's just going to be much more stressful than my current life. I like my current life, right? My current life is pretty good. And yeah, I do, you know, I know people joke, but like about, you know, this isn't really a job. And that's kind of true to an extent. Like, you know, let's be real. I'm not, you know, working out in the fields or whatever. But, you know, like I do, you know, it takes a lot of my time, right? Like a lot of my time in life is devoted to the game of Valorant and thinking about it and making videos about it and streaming it, right? Like a lot of my life is, particularly when it's, you know, during the in season, right? But this would also be probably more work if I had to guess, and also more stress and, you know, having to work with other people. I mean, who really wants to do that, right? Why do you think I'm doing this episode? It's so that I don't have to talk to anyone else, right? It's just me. So would I I mean, I would be interested in doing, but again, would I want to be like a head coach straight away? I mean, like I maybe want to be, you know, an assistant coach before you became a head coach, right? Like I think diving in just completely blind would be probably a strange decision from the org, but also a bit of a strange decision for me because I wouldn't want, you know, to mess it up badly because I have, you know, I have no experience in esports coaching, right? I have experience in, you know, sports coaching. Which obviously some of it would translate, but there are specifics to esports coaching that, you know, would be a bit different. So yeah, depends basically. Show me the money is basically the answer to that. Biggest Foot fan. Why is Foot gonna win stage 1? I mean, I did just say that Foot are my dark horse to make it to champs. So yeah, I guess well, do I agree that they'll win stage 1? Wait, you've gone back in time. Do you mean you must mean stage 2? But yeah. I guess I'm with you, to be honest, biggest Foot fan. Okay, let's move down here, past the Vikings question. Jinglazer asks, what do I think went wrong for Team Heretics? I think they had, well, I think they had a bit of a crisis of confidence. I also think that they, look, I mean, you know, the meme about they only lose to first and third, I mean, eventually that did come true. Now, were Wolves in, like, their best form when Wolves played Heretics? No. Right, I think that the Wolves that played against, like, Gen G versus the Wolves that played against Heretics was a bit of a different team, if I'm being honest. I just think that they just, like, the thing that's weird about Heretics is it wasn't like they were the most, you know, Tejo pilled team of all time, right? Like, you don't associate Heretics, you know, going into that tournament as being like, oh, they were Tejo merchants. So it perhaps was even more strange for them overall, you know, versus, you know, if like RRQ, right, who played a lot of Tejo, maybe it's a bit more understandable that they didn't do so well, you know, but for a team like Heretics who, you know, played some Tejo, but it wasn't like they were the most Tejo pilled team of all time, maybe it is a bit more strange that, but I just think it's a mental game, right? And I think the problem for teams like Team Heretics and G2, maybe Team Heretics, you know, feel like they've alleviated some of this pressure with EWC, but the problem that you can have sometimes is, if you are a team that puts the pressure on yourself of, we have to win this tournament, otherwise it's a failure, but you're a team that's never won a tournament before, I think that can cause a lot of problems, right? Because you've got this massive pressure on you without having kind of the confidence that winning a trophy gives you, right? Like, and I think it's happened to probably Paper Rex in the past as well, right? Like, weirdly enough, this was a tournament that people weren't expecting them to win, right? And it happens to be the one that they have. Whereas tournaments before, you know, maybe people did expect them to win and they didn't, right? And I think that can sometimes happen where you don't have that buff of, like, I know we can do this because we've done it before, but you have all of the pressure of everyone is expecting you to do it. And so I think for Heretics, you know, things started to go a bit wrong, and then that can spiral pretty quick, you know, as a team. And, you know, Valorant, I think, you know, like esports and Valorant, they are very psychological, right? All these players can aim. Put them in like a no pressure situation and they'll, you know, their aim will be incredible, right? Put them in a pressure situation, they start thinking about things too much and they'll start making a lot of mistakes, and that just happens. And do I think Yoru needs a nerf? If so, what nerf would I give it to stop teams from always picking Yoru? A lot of people will say probably that Yoru doesn't really need a nerf. The argument for Yoru not needing a nerf is that Yoru is hard to play, right? That's the argument for Yoru not needing a nerf, is he isn't easy to play. And we still see, like, if you watched Aspas, for instance, from MBR play Yoru, you know, his Yoru wasn't that great, right? They didn't find a ton of value from it necessarily, right? Which is the argument for Yoru, that you have to actually put time in to make it good. I think the problem I would say with Yoru is that Yoru kind of negates, like for me personally, like, I just, like, why would you play like flashing initiators for most part, right? There are some, like, you could argue, like, you know, maybe Gecko, you know, synergizes someone with Yoru with, you know, the different kinds of flashes. So maybe there are some caveats to that, but, you know, for the most part, why would you play that when I could play Yoru, right? And then that opens up the comp to, you know, I could play ISO on Haven like Fnatic, right? Or I could play, you know, we're seeing a lot of teams, you know, now add in Viper back into their comps because we've got this free slot here, right? So we're seeing a lot of Viper. We're seeing a lot of double duelist, right? Like, there's a lot of other good things you could do, and your kind of is just negating a whole section of the agent pool. So for that reason, I would say that Yoru might need a nerf to allow those other agents to come back in. What that nerf would be is a tough one. I think, man, I mean, that is honestly a tough argument, right? You could take away some util, right? I think you could argue that Yoru has a problem of, like, he has too much util, right? He has 2 TPs, 2 flashes, you know. Maybe that's a bit too much compared to, you know, some of the other agents that you see in the game now, right? Like, yeah, if Breach had 2 aftershocks, he'd be pretty good, right? Like, that would be a pretty significant buff, right? So maybe you could look at that and be like, maybe that's a bit too much. I don't know, though. That honestly, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. But yeah, I think maybe Yoru does need enough. Next question. Do I like the 1 import per team rule, or should the rules be more relaxed? No, I think this is a very good rule. I think this... I mean, even if this rule didn't exist in the current state of the game, I don't think it would be that big of a problem, honestly. I think most teams, you know, outside of Lev, you know, whatever kind of sub-region they belong to, have kind of stuck with players from that region for the most part, right? Maybe global as well, but that's maybe a bit of a unique case. So, I mean, I think the game is just super balanced, but I think that the 1 import rule per team keeps it balanced, right? Like, there would be a chance, and maybe you could already say, you know, this is happening, or people were worried about it happening, I think, to an extent, right? Of like, oh, there's a lot of Koreans, you know, in Pacific, right? And maybe if you didn't have this, you know, more and more Koreans, you know, would start to dominate. And that's for multiple reasons, right? The same is true in Americas with, you know, NA or NA players, right? Because it's easy to get visas, right? So like if you're American, you know, we don't have to worry about a visa. So that's just an advantage that you have, right? Same for Koreans, obviously, in Korea as well. Like that you know, that's not going to be a problem. So that's good, right? And you get that advantage. But I think that overall, this is just a good rule that Valorant is blessed to be the one esport, apparently, that literally across the world, pretty much, it seems to be pretty balanced in skill level, for whatever reason that is. So yeah, I think keep it in, because that should help keep that the same as well. Let's move on to our next one from Zwoom. What would I change about Omen Viper to make other controllers more viable? Or what would I change buff for the different controllers to make them more feasible? Look, I've been on record saying that the Paranoia is too good. I still think that is the case. I still think the Paranoia is just too good. It just, like, at the highest level, the Paranoia, right? It just, like, every other flash you can shoot or turn. The Paranoia you can't. Yeah, that's obviously going to be pretty good at a pro level, right? Where they're pretty good at turning or shooting flashes. Like, the one that you can't do that to either, you know, like, yeah, that's going to be pretty good. So I've talked about nothing that in some way. With my personal opinion being that it should be like a shock dart, where if the edge of the Paranoia hits you, it blinds you for less time than if the center hits you. I think that would make sense. I think that would be good. For Viper, it's a bit more of an agent pool problem, I think, in one sense, because I think that the thing about Viper is Viper has no competition, right? I would argue that right now, looking at where we are, Viper is the only agent in the game that has no competition, right, for their niche now, right? Like we added Fade for Sova, we added, you know, Deadlock for Sage, you know, we added ISO for Reyna, right? Like eventually all of these different agents got an agent that was kind of similar to them. And, you know, that kind of, and maybe they were hoping to do that with Harbor. Maybe a Harbor redesign will come out that it does actually mean that Harbor's, you know, a competitor with Viper. Who knows? But right now, I think the problem is that, you know, that if you're playing a secondary controller, almost all of the time, it's going to make sense that that's going to be Viper, right? So, and the next agent should hopefully be a controller. So my personal hope is that that controller is more of a secondary controller in its design, and therefore can compete with Viper, right? And that hopefully would alleviate some of Viper's pick rate. I still think Viper would be good, because Viper fundamentally is good because of the way that Fuel works, right? Fuel as a you know, way of it working, and for Neon's ability, obviously it's like, yeah, it's like a nice little extra thing, but, you know, not that big of a deal. But for Viper, it's like the control that you get, right, versus other smokes is just way higher, right? I can put that up for 1 second if I want. I can put it up for 5 seconds if I want. I can put it up for 10 seconds if I want, right? And I choose that. You don't choose that. I choose that, right? The game isn't choosing that. It's not like every other smoke where it's a defined amount of time. I choose that. So the control that you have, and then just being able to cycle that constantly throughout the round, it's just very, very strong, right? Like that just is very, very strong in and of itself, right? And like that's the thing. You could take certain things away. Like the Viper wall on Haven, right? I mean, like that in and of itself and just what it does to the map and how it forces you to play around it. Just that one ability, Viper doesn't need any other abilities, and Viper would still be pretty good on Haven, to be honest, just from that attacking wall alone. So, yeah, Viper is a tough one. That I first would like to see Viper have more competition in that role, and then see what Viper's pick rate, is looking like. And then if Viper was still that's the thing though. What do you do? I mean, you could always nerf the way the fuel. Yeah, you could nerf the way that the fuel comes back, right? In terms of the time it takes for the fuel to actually come back. That would be one way of doing it, I suppose. Let's move on to the next one, which is from Guilty Clown / Corrode Enjoyer. This is a long question, so you can't see all of it. But do you think that wall banging is unhealthy for the game? And then they talk about Corrode and the paper walls and how they like older versions of CS where paper walls were commonplace. And the last comment they make here is, it seems Riot wants to almost encourage more use of guns with high wall penetration. And I actually agree, to be honest, because of what we've seen of Corrode so far. Has it really been a problem? Like, has it really actually been a problem on Corrode so far in the pro games that you've watched? The answer is probably no. Right? No, it's not really been a problem. Everyone was fretting about it, but the universal truth that you need to understand is that almost all pro teams almost always buy rifles. It's the same thing when the Outlaw first came out. I was talking about, how light shields will still be good because not enough people will buy it. And there was a brief window where people were, but that seems to have gone as well, right? Like, again, most people have just defaulted back to, I'm just going to buy a rifle all the time, pretty much. And we have seen some Odins on that map, and those Odins do, some damage. But again, like, we haven't seen people take it to an extreme where I'd say it's, really a problem. We haven't seen, people plant on A and then sit, back in main with 2 Odins and win a post plant by doing that, right? That hasn't been the case, right? If that did happen, that would be a problem. And maybe that is still possible and people should be doing that, right? It's very possible that should be the case, but yeah, I agree, to be honest. I think that maybe they are trying to, encourage you to use different guns. I remember there was a game where EG on Ascent, like, just kept buying Guardians, even though they could afford rifles, and they just kept spamming through walls, right? And, like, just trying that. And it actually worked okay for them, and they bought, like, way more Guardians than I'd ever seen anyone buy before, right? And it actually did kind of go okay for them. And it does make you think, like, yeah, maybe that's something that you could make work. If you wanted to. So yeah, I'm right now, like, it's fine. Maybe it will be a problem that they need to change in the future, but right now we're chilling. I'm gonna skip the question of why I hate Man City, because they ruined football and they're everything that's wrong with football. What off-meta agent would you most like to see entering the meta for champs? Oh, good question. Good question. I mean, personally, it would be Harbor, I think, because I think if Yoru stays good, I still think that Yoru Harbor, you could cook up some things, right? You could really cook up some things with Yoru Harbor, I think. Like, I just think it would be interesting, right? And I think the creative teams with that. But that's the thing, if Harbor was actually good and you could do, like, the loud wall on Pearl, right? Like, that goes all the way through mid. Like, imagine if Harbor was actually good and you could do creative things with Harbor. It might be somewhat interesting, right? So yeah, I personally wouldn't be against that. I suppose. Other options. What are fun agents to watch? I mean, I want to see more. I mean, Deadlock already is, I think, pretty good, but I would like to see more Deadlock. To be honest, I just think the agent's good, and I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more Deadlock, I suppose. But yeah, those would be my options. Let's move on. I will thank you here, by the way, Albania Reactor, for reacting for 1,000 days with Albania flags. Thank you for that. Okay, next question from Junai. On Sliggy's stream, Sliggy has said that he thinks G2 will do good as long as they follow Anderzz comps, and that they should have done that for Toronto. However, I don't believe G2 would go to Toronto without listening to Anderzz at all. Do you think Anderzz has had a hand in the questionable comps in Toronto, or that they tried some other comps that didn't work in practice? Or do I think that Anderzz wasn't involved in Toronto at all? Is the overall question. The truth is, I have no idea how involved Anderzz was in the. I mean, I know he's on their coaching staff to an extent, but I don't know. I think that's a strange take from Sliggy, because again, maybe he has inside info on, you know, I don't know, Anderzz complaining to him that, you know, Josh isn't listening to him and not playing his comp. I don't know though, but like I think that's a strange thing to say, unless he does have, you know, behind the scenes info, because I don't know if they are listening to Anderzz and playing his comps or not, right? I mean, I know Anderzz and like some of his theories on the game, but you know, again, like I would assume G2, the way that they come up with comps is they have a general thing, like they like Yoru, for instance. They seem to like Vice a lot, right? They play a lot of Yoru, they play a lot of Vice, right? So I'm gonna guess that, you know, that's kind of like either a Josh thing or a Valorant thing or an Anderzz thing or whoever it is, right? It's kind of pushing that forward. But then also it's going to be like agent comfort, right? Like you're not going to put people on agents that they don't enjoy playing or, you know, don't like playing, right? So I think that it's not all. I would assume it's kind of more of a team cohesion, you know, thing like that. Maybe one person is dictating it all, and maybe it's not Anderzz. I don't know, but I also think that's a strange thing. Like G2 didn't do that bad in Toronto, right? Like they lost to Fnatic and Paper Rex, and I think they lost 13-11, 13-10 to Paper Rex, and 13-10, 13-10 to Fnatic. It's not like they got destroyed and they lost to the two finalist teams, right? Like that's not embarrassing to lose to the final two teams that everyone accepts are also very good, right? So I don't think they did that bad. And again, I don't know if Sliggy has insider info on what's going on in G2, but I think they'll be fine. I think probably either way they'll be fine, and you know, I think they'll be pretty good going into champs. I mean, they've already made it to champs, so I think they'll probably be fine. We're not going to talk about the T1 documentary, because kind of already done that. But yeah, not ideal. Let's move on to the next one, which is a very interesting question, which is, what makes a good coach? What does someone like Mini do that other coaches don't that makes him so much better as a coach? Well, straight away in your question, you have assumed something that you don't know is true, right? And that is, you know, Mini is so much better as a coach than everyone else. Because here's the thing about what makes a good coach is probably the most important thing, at least in my opinion, to what makes a good coach is understanding what your actual role as that coach is, right? Because your role in a team, and it doesn't matter whether it's sports or esports, your role in that team will be different depending on what team you're going to and what your responsibilities will be within that team will change based on the team. And that won't necessarily be laid out to you, right? It might be, but it probably won't be necessarily laid out to you. As a coach, you need to figure out, what am I best doing for this team, right? For instance, let's take Mini as our example, right? So Mini, from an outside perspective, and maybe he would have different words on it, and you know, but from an outsider, my perspective on Mini's coaching career, I would say that he seems to be a coach that thrives in kind of a supportive, strategic role, right? That's what he's doing on Paper Rex, it seems, right? Like he's not the head coach, he's just kind of helping from afar, right? Giving them notes and stuff like that. And on Fnatic, I would say that probably Boaster is kind of the leader, you know, in terms of like, it's his vision that is the main driver for Fnatic, and Mini at the time was there to help support and facilitate, you know, Boaster's kind of, you know, vision of the team, right? And so Mini, we would assume, is exceptional in that role, right? But if you put Mini on a different team, maybe where, you know, there isn't another leader on the team, right? And it's just like, we've got 5 rookies, and, you know, our IGL isn't that comfortable and isn't that confident and is kind of new to IGLing, right? Put Mini on that team and maybe he wouldn't do so well, right? And that's not a slight at Mini. That's just the truth of, like, that's true for every coach. Because when you, like, no coach is amazing at everything, right? Like, even, you know, let's take sports as an example here, right? Like someone like Pep Guardiola, right? Pep Guardiola, in reality, gets it pretty easy as a coach, because any team that Pep Guardiola goes to, that team is just going to say to him, we know that you can win when you just do whatever. If you're just given the keys to the castle, we know that you can win. So any team in their right mind is just going to say to Pep Guardiola, we're just going to give you the keys to the castle, do what you want, right? Which is generally going to be a lot easier than, you know, someone who's going into a team where you don't have all the power, you don't have all the control, right? And you're going to have to manage, like, and figure out what you can and cannot do whilst you're there, right? That's the position a lot of coaches, particularly in sports, but I assume in esports as well to some extent, you know, that's the situation they find themselves in, right? Like, you might go to a team as a coach, right? And you've already got like an IGL. You know, let's say you went to a team like Navi, right? A team that, you know, it's kind of middle of the pack, but you've got like an established IGL there who is the leader of the team, right? Well, you might have a disagreement with Angel about, you know, or for instance, we saw it with NRG, right? Like Bonkar and FNS, right? Bonkar gets dropped when FNS is there, right? Probably because they just had a very different vision and it just couldn't work, right? It just couldn't work because they just had completely different visions of the game. And you know, so then you have this power struggle, and, you know, they went with FNS and now they've gone with Bonkar, right? Like, and it all goes bad. And that doesn't mean that Bonkar's a bad coach, right? That doesn't mean that it was his fault. It just means that he didn't fit that team at that specific time. And so yeah, what makes a good coach basically is, I think literally the most important thing is understanding somewhat yourself and then how you fit into the dynamics of that team, and maximizing yourself and what you are good at within that team structure, because otherwise, you know, it just won't work. And the truth is, like, look, I mean, on my coaching degree course, you know, it was full of people, and I'm sure Valorant is full of these coaches as well, right? That just think, I'm the best coach in the world. I can, you know, do anything. You know, I'll fix any scenario. Put me in any team. We'll be better, right? Like, that's what they think. And the truth is that isn't the case, right? There are some scenarios that, you know, I mean, I look at Elevated, right? Like going to global, right? Like, could any coach in his position, you know, coming in as a new assistant coach, first time on a tier 1 team, head coach gets dropped 2 weeks in, players haven't had visas, players are underperforming. Like, could anyone realistically have, you know, managed to get global to Toronto in that situation? Probably not, right? Probably not, because there was too much else going on at the time that just made it, you know, an impossibility essentially, you know, to be a good team. So yeah, I think we often, and that's why it's so hard to judge what is a good coach, because it depends, right? Some coaches are good at certain things, and some, you know, are good at other things, and that's just the way it is. And you're not going to be good at everything, and sometimes what you're good at won't necessarily help, right? Like if you were a super strategic coach, you know, that knew every lineup in Valorant and knew exactly what the meta was and what exactly you were going to play on every map and had it all figured out, and you had this perfect plan for every map, well, that might not help you if you're on a team, you know, with a Boaster or with an FNS that, you know, already knows what they want to do. Well, you're not going to be that much help, right? So yeah, it's that. I mean, I can talk a bit about T1 though here as well, in terms of one other thing that makes a good coach is understanding your players, right? And we saw in the T1 documentary, Autumn, and the way that he was giving feedback, I wouldn't say just to Sylvan, to be honest. I would also say to Itsu as well, right? That because this is what you're going to get in sports and esports. You're going to get a mix of personalities that don't respond the same to feedback, right? So generally, when, you know, when I was doing my coaching in football or whatever, generally when you're giving feedback, right, and when you're giving group feedback, what I would tend to do is you just talk about the group, right? You don't single people out giving group feedback, because it's not necessarily always going to be helpful, right? Like, and you can have people chime in and stuff, and you can be honest with each other, but sometimes for some personalities, like an Itsu or a Sylvan, it might be better to, give them the negative feedback of things they need to improve upon in a 1v1 scenario, right? And do it gently, and praise them at the same time, right? Like, that's going to work better, and for other people, like, like a Stacks, maybe, right? Maybe you can call out Stacks in front of the group, right? And he'll take that, and he'll be fine with it, right? And maybe he'll come back at you, and that's fine, right? Like, but you got to understand, like, the people, because really, especially in a game like Valorant, right, it's mostly psychological, right? Like, again, all of these players who got to this level, they can all play. And what's interesting about Valorant is we don't seem to have, like, a player who is, like, way better than everyone else, right? There isn't, like, a clear GOAT of this game that is always like, oh, this guy's just so much better than everyone else, right? That doesn't really exist in Valorant right now, at least. So all these players can play. It's just getting them in the right mindset to be able to play at their max. And one of the big parts of that is going to be, figuring out their personalities and how to manage that, essentially. Let's move on, though. Let's move on to this, which is about Harbor. What buff do I think Harbor needs to become hard meta on a map like Icebox? I mean, Harbor, I think his win rate on Icebox this year is actually pretty good, which might surprise some of you. But the like, the old school, like, Harbor Jet comp, actually its win rate is pretty decent statistically, at least so far this year. So maybe he's not that bad of a pick anyway, right? But I think the main Harbor buff that they need to give, they need to understand what they want to do with Harbor, right? Because again, they need to, like they've done with kind of Phoenix and Reyna more recently, where they've kind of just accepted, hey, these are ranked agents, let's just balance them for ranked. They need to decide with Harbor, like, whether they want to change him in a way that makes him more appealing to ranked, and more fun, and so that more people are playing him, or if they just want to focus on, like, let's not care if he's that fun to play necessarily, let's just make him good enough to see picks in pro play. And that will depend. Speaking of Harbor, I need a drink. So yeah, they need to decide that. Again, there are some buffs to Harbor that I think you could do automatically and he would be pretty good, right? Which would be, remove the slow for teams on walls. I still can't believe that hasn't happened. And one, I think making his wall a bit longer would also help, right? So that you could do perhaps more interesting, creative walls that, are sectioning off, multiple parts of the map in one easier. I think that also would be pretty good. So yeah, there are some buffs that I wish that they would just do, even if they're trying to figure out a redesign. Next question. Why am I so down on EG? And how do you think about them making champs, since they had a better split 2 last year and were really strong at the end of split 1? I am down on EG. I will admit that, like, I am. I don't dislike EG. I've got nothing against them whatsoever. In fact, I think them making champs would be probably a cool story, right? Because they would be a bit of an underdog story. Potter going back to champs, Ye going back to champs. That would all be cool. Honestly, I'm for it. But the reason I'm slightly down on them is because I just think that there are other teams in Americas that just have more firepower than them. That, I think for EG, like, I think they, like, I think that some of EG's rise, towards the end of stage 1 in Americas was, partly them playing pretty well, but it was also partly just, like, a lot of the other teams struggling just with, like, a team who played slow, right? And again, that's a good adaptation from EG, because again, like, if you put EG in EMEA, I don't think they would have done that well, to be honest, because all the teams would have been like, yeah, we know how to play against this. But I think in Americas, basically, simply because of the fact that they played quite slow, there was quite a few rounds where, it seemed like the other team was getting bored or something, right? And they were just like, oh, nothing's happened in 30 seconds. Let me just walk down here. Oh, I'm dead. Like, that seemed to happen a fair amount for EG. So, you know, whilst it worked for them, I don't know. I just don't think that they have enough, I suppose. That's all it is. Again, I just don't think they have enough. I'd be happy for them to prove me wrong. And as you say, I do think that they are a team that gets better as time goes on, right? Just historically with Potter at the helm, EG have been, you know, a team that gets better as things go on. And I think they got a bit fortunate to play 2G in the first game, right? Who did look better, but maybe on like the best team in their group. Because I think that, you know, EG weren't amazing in that game themselves. But I think you're right that by the end, but like they got a win. And I think by the end of stage 2, like when we get to like week 5 and stuff, you know, they will probably be a decent team. They probably will make playoffs now that they've beaten 2G as well. You know, because they should beat Fioria, might beat Cloud9, obviously G2 and Sen probably not, but we'll see. But yeah, look, if EG go to champs, then good for them. Again, I got nothing against these teams, especially EG. Could two gluers, 2G, potentially make playoffs with the return of Spike? You know what's interesting about this set boss is I think the answer is yes, but I think they needed to beat EG. Like if they beat EG, right, they beat Fioria. That's 2 games won right there. They would have the head-to-head over EG. They probably make 4th, I think. All they would have to do is beat Fioria, and they probably make 4th. Now that they've lost to EG, they're probably gonna have to beat Cloud9, right? Because their other games are Sen and G2. So unless like they can catch, I mean, they play G2 this week, right? Who probably again will have Baby Bay. I guess you have to hope that G2, who have already qualified for champs, you know, just go out drinking every day and just don't care and just live a month of, you know, partying life. Honestly, from G2's perspective, might be better for them to not make playoffs. Like, they actually could, in theory, like, just go, what if they did just sandbag and just not make playoffs so that they could just prep? Just spend all that time prepping, essentially, and not reveal any comps and not reveal anything that they're working on. Honestly, I doubt they're going to do that because they'll want to compete and they'll want to win and they'll want to win stage 2 and prove that they definitely are the best team in Americas. They will want to do that. But, you know, that wouldn't, if you're 2G, maybe you can convince them. Maybe you can say, hey guys, we need this and you don't. Do an Ascension team, you know, do us a favor. Do your fellow Ascension team a favor here. You know, we both beat M80. Next question from Timid. Should, if so, at what point, Riot include agent bans? My initial thought is that they shouldn't. But it is like, but again, I'm thinking in the like short to medium term here. But long term, you know, if Valorant is still going and we've got 80 agents in the game, yeah, then maybe, yeah. Probably should at that point, right? So yeah, I think it's one of those things that right now, I just don't think it would be a great idea, but I think, like for instance, right now, right, if you banned Yoru, you know, that would be a pretty sizable change, you know, to a lot of like what would you play instead, right? That's going to give you, like, if you've built a comp around like, hey, we're going to play Yoru Recon Initiated Double Controller Sentinel. Like, if that's your comp for a map, and then they ban Yoru on you, I guess you could play Neon on some of them, but on others, you'd be like, oh, I don't want to play Neon on this map, right? Or like, if you're playing like, you know, a Sent double Senti with a Yoru, that's like, well, now we've taken away Yoru. You know, like that feels bad, right? So I'm not sure we're quite there yet. I don't think we're close to there yet, but maybe one day. Maybe one day. Speaking of Yoru, the next question from Dream. Do you think we are officially in a Yoru meta? I think if you were to describe the meta now, you probably would say Yoru is a big part of it. It's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, like Viper's pick rate, for instance, at Toronto, was, you know, higher than Yoru. Are we in a Viper meta? Yes, maybe. I think the meta right now you would describe as Omen, Viper, Yoru / Neon, Recon, Sentinel. right? That's the kind of meta that we find ourselves in. I don't think it's that. The thing is, people often describe like, oh, remember the Harbor Viper meta? But the thing is, like Harbor's pick rate was like, I mean, outside of Americas, Harbor's pick rate was like 10%. You know, like like we weren't in a we were in a double controller meta, but it wasn't a Harbor wasn't part of it. Harbor was a part of it on like 2 maps. And maybe like 3 or 4 in Americas. But for the other regions, it was like you might play Harbor on Icebox, you might play Harbor on Pearl. I mean, EMEA didn't even play Pearl; they refused to play Pearl. So in EMEA, it didn't exist, right? So are we in a Yoru meta? Kind of. I mean, in the sense of the Duelist class, if you're just looking at that, then yeah, we're kind of in a Yoru Neon meta, I would say, for the most part. But on the whole, Yoru is one of the main agents in the meta, but I don't know if I would consider this like a complete Yoru meta. Like, it was a Tejo meta. You know, like, Tejo came in, and, like, you know, if he didn't get nerfed for Toronto, his pick rate probably would have been in the 80s, I would guess, right? Which, for a non-controller, because you don't have to pick, you know, Tejo if you don't want, that is quite high. So, yeah. Are we quite in a Yoru meta? I wouldn't quite say that, but whatever. Okay, the manual. Do I think Waylay is fixable through buffs, or do you believe her design makes her inherently bad? No, her design doesn't make her inherently bad, and I think we've already seen from Paper Rex, you know, the Yoru Waylay. I think Waylay is good in a double duelist sense. So if Yoru got nerfed, I think Waylay would be in a bit of a rough spot. But I think Yoru Waylay, as we've seen from Paper X, as I said, is fairly decent, to be honest. It's fairly decent, because if you think about Waylay, right, like with Waylay, you're going to go in, and then, you know, you're potentially going to go out. The problem with that is, if you play solo Waylay sometimes, is your Waylay is going to dive in with util coming behind, get shot, TP out, and no one else is going to be through the choke point, right? Like, if the defenders molly off the choke point and you're playing Waylay, so, you know, we've seen this on Bind, right? Like, I Gecko Flash, I Fade Haunt, my Waylay goes in, the Waylay gets shot, the Waylay TP's out. Oh no, they brim mollied the choke point. Well, we've just used a bunch of util and traded it for, like, we've just traded it for 1 molly, right? We've used our Fade Hunt, we've used our Dizzy, we've used our Dash and our Recall, and we've traded it for 1 molly, right? Like, that's the bad scenario for Waylay that, like, makes you think, like, oh, I don't know about this. But in a double duelist sense, that isn't the case, right? Because in a double duelist sense, you know, you've got another duel, like, Waylay goes in, Crosshairs move to shoot the Waylay, other duelist is there, trade, right? Like, there it makes sense, right? And I think that you can make other things like that work for Waylay. So, and the thing is, like, any agent is fixable through buffs, right? You give any agent like 5 of their ability, you know, that's like a 1 or 2 ability, like, they will be good. Like, you know, eventually they just will be good. And I think with Waylay, like, do I still think Waylay is that good? Like, no, I think there are just better options, right? If I'm playing double duelist, I would rather play an ISO if that's the way I want to go, or, you know, Neon Yoru, Raise Yoru. Like, I would rather, you know, those other options, but it's not like again, the saturate is fine. The ult is a bit annoying, because when it hits your teammates, that's quite bad. But, you know, the ult is still pretty good when it does hit people. And yeah, you can, like Paper X, find things work. Now, this question I really like. Do you think we'll ever see a really quirky meta? I don't think Triple Duelist will ever be the one, but Triple Duelist Sentinel controller, if yet, what agent / meta would need to look like for it to become a reality? I think of those, and you didn't mention Initiator, but that could be one, right? Like, we've seen some teams play Triple Initiator, and the thing that you need to have a triple of a thing be a meta, again, I doubt Duelist, I really doubt Sentinel. Controller, I think, is possible. The reason I say controller is possible is if a controller came out that maybe they made the unique thing about them, you know, was that their smoke is something that, you know, they get 1 smoke that lasts the whole round, right? And other than that, they've got, you know, a bunch of Initiator type utility, right? Like, then you could see something like a, you know, triple controller work, maybe, right? Then maybe, like, you would have something like that. And that's the thing that you need. You essentially, and as we get more and more agents, this is more and more possible, right? You essentially just need like more and more agents that are kind of more hybrid style, right? Like a Yoru, for instance. If you got a bunch of those type of agents that were more kind of hybridy in terms of how they work, then yeah, you could, right? Like for instance, if you got like a controller, like give Jet back the 7-second smokes, right? 3 7-second smokes. Could you play Yoru, Jet, another controller, and another duelist? Like you could, right? You could. It's possible. It's possible you could. With like a recon, who not on certain maps, like maybe, right? Could be fun. So yeah, you just need enough like hybrid, I think, of agents. We're not there yet, but maybe in like a couple years time that those agents will exist, and then maybe it will be possible. For it to become like, the thing is, most Valorant teams simply wouldn't do it. But if you got one team that was like bold enough to try, yeah, they might. I mean, we've seen on maps, like if you would have told people like 2 years ago, like, hey, on Lotus, the meta for a while is going to be no Sentinel, they would have looked at you like you had 10 eyes. They just would have said, it's a 3-site map. It's a big 3-site map. What the hell are you talking about? Right? But G2 with their comp, when Tejo was meta, that was the comp that most people played, and it was the comp that had a very good win rate. It did pretty well. So there's always chance for things to change. A lot of questions about Yoru. What factors have led to the Yoru meta despite Yoru not receiving any buffs? Is it just VCT teams realizing his power, or just synergy with other strong agents being developed? Well, I think it's both. I think if you go back in time, I mean, listen to old Cosmic Divides. Me and Elevated will be probably popping off about how strong Yoru is, and no one's playing him. Because Yoru was always strong, right? It was always there, but as I said before, Yoru was just difficult to play. And I think it was the same thing with Jet, right? When Jet first got nerfed, the dash got changed. Jet wasn't that good, but Jet's pick rate was still super high because people knew how to play Jet, and they didn't know how to play Neon, and they didn't know how to play Yoru. So they didn't, even though, maybe those agents were actually better at that time. Right? So it was just kind of, and that's the thing, like, perception isn't always reality, right? And sometimes the devs, like they did with Neon or ISO, right? Sometimes they will just go like, here's a gigantic buff, go and play this agent so that you learn how to play it, and then we'll nerf it, but you'll, like Neon, right? But then you'll still play it because you actually learn how to play it, right? Neon is a perfect example of this, right? Of the perception of Neon was probably wrong in terms of, like Neon was actually better than people thought, but no one had just put in the time to actually, learn Neon enough to actually play it. And I think that Yoru was always good. Yoru was just always good, but just people didn't know how to play it, so they didn't. They thought it was too hard to play. So yeah, but I think Yoru is just good. And there's also, like Tejo helped, I think, Yoru, right? Because Tejo could miss all the places, like if you're Yoru TPing somewhere, you might be worried about a certain angle that, oh, they might kill me. They might just be staring at me and kill me straight away. But Tejo kind of alleviated that because it's like, oh, well, now they're going to stand there, right? So it was helped a little bit, but I do think that Yoru was just good, and we are still seeing a lot of Yoru, right? So, yeah. Do I think it's time for Riot to slow down the addition of new agents and focus on a map redesign? I mean, the agent team and the map team, I think, are two separate teams. So I don't think that this is a one or the other thing. I think if I was talking about things that Valorant needs in the game, right? The thing that I would tell Riot to work on would be, keep bringing out new agents. Yeah, maybe some of the maps do need a bit of a redesign. But also at a certain point, it's like people get so familiar with the map that when you redesign it, like what map has like such a big glaring issue that needs a redesign that wouldn't like potentially make things worse? You got to think about that. But I would say like you've probably had a lot of people working on the replay system, right? When that comes out, and to be fair, they've had like, I'm sure a lot of people working on the console and version of the game, the mobile version of the game, right? They will have spent some resources you know, doing all that stuff and the replay system as well. What I would like to see from Valorant now, though, game modes. We need game modes in this game. We need some game modes in this game. We need, you know, we've seen it like, you know, with Overwatch and what they're doing with Stadium and stuff, right? Like, Valorant needs other ways of playing, right? Like, ranked, sure, that's your bread and butter, of course. Like, it's going to be there. You know, Premier, sure, can understand that. But, like, but more like, okay, you've got like Swift play and stuff, but let's be real, that's just like a normal version of the game. We need more kind of like interesting, different, unique things to do in the Valorant, I think. And there are so many things that you could do, right? There are so many things that you could do, you know, of like creating, you know, just fun little challenge modes, right? Like, you know, jet knives, you know, updraft mode, right? You're all fighting on like, you know, in the sky with little like, you know, there's only like a few little places that you can actually stand on, right? Like, you know, things like that that are more casual, like this game desperately needs, in my opinion. Let's move on. Let's move past that one. If VCT Americas, yeah, I don't think VCT Americas will split into 2 regions. I'm being honest. I think that's already gone. Oh, I need to move this now. How do I do that? How do I do that? Hold on. We've got some TMV tech problems. Oh, I know how I can do it. I can just type in here a bunch of messages. Yeah, and just... What a way of figuring that out. Should have put it at the bottom, shouldn't I? Here we go. Okay. Who is the best VCT duelist in every generic meta? As in when no single character is broken like Neon or Tejo, just double controls the meta or double initiator. If you're just in, let's call it a normal meta where yeah, like no single thing takes over the game. So you're just talking like in a vacuum power level of the duelists. I would say Yoru is probably the best in a vacuum. Then I think it's close between Neon and Raze. I think both have options. Both I would argue have a chance. I would then actually, well, I mean the thing is, of course, then you've got kind of the different duelists, right? Like comparing ISO to Jet is quite strange. So yeah, that's a bit strange because again, like an agent like ISO can only really work if you have an agent like Yoru, right? Like this is the thing: if Yoru gets nerfed, then ISO's pick rate will go down quite a lot, right? Because again, like Yoru enables, you know, like Skye did back in the day, right? Like you've got a recon and flashing in one agent. You know, with Yoru, you got flashes and entry in one agent. That opens up a spot for agents like ISO or Deadlock or, you know, whoever else, right? Maybe that's another problem with Viper as well, to be honest, is that when we open up another slot, the default is just go to Viper. So maybe they need to really look at the kind of strength of Viper versus ISO and Deadlock, you know, and Sage and those kind of agents. Honestly, I hope that they are, to be honest. But yeah, I would say Yoru is almost certainly the choice there. Let's move on. What teams have been / are the most hate watchable and why? Well, obviously, recently it's been T1. But again, I do think the T1 thing is a bit blown out of proportion. But obviously, recently, T1. Over the past, I think... I mean, obviously, the popular teams are always going to get haters, right? Your Sentinels, you know, I mean, G2 seem to have a lot of haters as well. Team Heretics seem to have a lot of haters. I think Fnatic and particularly Paper Rex, Fnatic to an extent as well, have somehow been able, you know, they've managed to somewhat avoid the hate. Maybe if Fnatic continued just winning and dominating from 2023 onwards, maybe if they, you know, had won in a tournament in 2024 as well, maybe then you would get a more sizable... I mean, I know there are Fnatic haters out there, but, you know, even more... Like, I feel like there's more Heretics haters than there are Fnatic haters, which, you know, is a bit strange considering Heretics haven't won anything. But like, I mean, I always get accused of hating teams, and I really don't. You know, I really don't. I watch too much Valorant to be. I mean, I guess I hate the teams that Wolves are playing, and sometimes it might come across as like, you know, I know in some streams because I felt it myself, right? Like sometimes I am just rooting for a team, right, and rooting for a story, and that means that I am rooting against the other team. That doesn't mean that I hate that other team. You know, like EG, right? Like my opinion on EG is that I don't think that they will be that great. It doesn't mean that I hate them. That's just my honest opinion, right? Like again, sometimes like we were talking about this on Plat Chat the other day. Like sometimes, you know, if you're rooting for a team to do something, that means you've got to root against someone else doing it. Sometimes just the way it is. Honestly, I think we need more hate watch. So I think we need more people leaning into it, essentially. I think we need more people leaning into being the villain, in my opinion. That is what I would say. We don't have enough villains in Valorant. We would be better off with more villains in Valorant. It's a tough role to play, because you have to have a lot of self-confidence, you know, and be able to accept being hated, which is a tough thing to do. But if someone is willing to do it, I think it would make the scene better, right? Particularly if you're a good team, like leaning into it, you know, and you see like the G2 Twitter or the Sentinels Twitter sometimes will lean into that kind of stuff. But I mean like the players. That's what you need. You need the players or the coaches, you know, like really leaning into it. And I think we could use with more WWE, you know, type stuff in Valorant, because it's just better. It's just a better spectacle, to be honest. Like, you know, when Fnatic were getting booed or whatever, you know, whoever was playing loud was getting booed in lock-in, the community reaction was like negative to that. And it's like, what? In my opinion, it was like, what the hell are you on about? Like, that's good. You want, like, I hope that when, like, it would be better for the scene, you know, if we went to Champs in Paris, right? And all the EU fans, anytime an NA team comes on the stage, they're getting booed, right? An EMEA team comes on the stage, yeah, they're going crazy, right? Like, that would be good. That's good. That's fun to watch, you know. And if you're an EU fan or an American or an NA fan or whatever, right? Like, you're more invested. Like, no, I want my team to win now, right? You want them to win more, and it would be better. So, bring in more. I mean, again, it doesn't need to be like, you know, it doesn't need to be, you know, crazy. It doesn't need to go over the line, right? But like booing is like, who cares? Who cares? Okay, let's move on here. What is my perfect map pool, and what should never come back into the rotation? The second part of this is easy. Icebox. Icebox is the worst map by far. Okay, it is a map without macro. That is unbelievable. Well, I mean, it does have some, but let's be real, not really. So yeah, that's just, I just hate that map. I hate everything about it. It's so boring to watch. As someone who personally prefers, like if I was to do an analysis of a game, right, I do prefer talking about the macro, right, versus the micro. You know, I do, you know, videos on both depending on what's happened, you know, overall. But generally, I think that, you know, I prefer like when a big grand strategy of a map comes together. I think that that's personally cooler to see for me than like, oh, they had a cool Sova Dark KO Flash combo. You know, that's my opinion. You know, so I mean, watching good util, you know, in a micro sense is also cool. That's cool too. But you know, and I do like, you know, big retakes and big execs. You know, they can also be cool. But I do personally like, you know, when FNS is, you know, faking people out, and you know they've inserted people here, and you watch a whole round come together, like that's personally what I like, and that just doesn't really happen on Icebox in any meaningful or interesting way. So I hate the map. The rest, my perfect map pool would, I mean, again, you have to remember that I personally, you know, watch a lot more Valorant than I play, so I'm not as bothered whether a map is good to play or not. I care about whether it's good to watch. So I would say Fracture and Split would be like permanent, never leaving. If it was me. I personally like this thing. I like rotating map pool. I think that's good, right? Because sometimes I do get a bit sick of a map and I don't want to see it, right? So personally, my perfect map pool though would definitely not include Abyss or Breeze either. It would probably have. So we've got Fracture and Split. It would have Haven in there, of course. It's a third map. What other maps would I like? I mean, I quite like Bind, to be honest, but I am a bit wary that we already have Fracture and Split. So Bind, even though it's a map I like, I could see an argument for not including it because it might get a bit samey with those two maps also in the pool. Lotus is one that I'm not too sure. Honestly, I think I would put Pearl in there, I guess, as kind of a map that has at least some big elements to it that I can tolerate. Corrode, I guess I would put that in there for now because I'm interested in it, right? At least right now, I'm quite interested in Corrode. So let's put Corrode in there. That's 5. And then what? I've got like a choice of like Ascent, Lotus. What else have I missed? Bind. What would I'd probably pick. I mean, right now though, Ascent is actually okay. So right now I would put Ascent in there because we don't have the boring meta, at least right now. And then yeah, man, making a full 7 map pool is quite rough in this game, isn't it? Oh, Sunset, I forgot. Yeah, let's put Sunset in instead of Lotus. Not a great Lotus fan. I think Lotus is the problem I have with Lotus is like the fights on A are kind of like so integral to the map that I feel like it limits you. You know what I mean? Like it's like you kind of have to engage in it to an extent. Otherwise you will just lose. And so you just end up with like the same, you end up with like it coming around in different times, right? Like you can go for a big A fight at the start of the round. You can go for a BC default and then come back to A. The defenders can go, try and catch you out with it. Like there are different things going on, but it does a lot of it does come back to like, well, at some point we've got to push the defenders off A, right? Or if you're the defenders, some point we've got to know what's going on over towards A. So I do get a bit sick of it sometimes. Let's move on. What is my opinion on 6-man rosters? Do I think in the future most teams will be running 6-man rosters? No, I don't. I think 6-man rosters would make sense if there was like certain agents that were extremely difficult to play but were also very good, right? Like imagine if Yoru was like 20-30% more difficult to play, right? And you really needed to like spend hours and hours and hours to even get like any value from the agent. Then maybe you could make a 6-man roster, right? Where you have someone who is just like a specialist on like a certain agent or two. That might make sense. But I think in general, that isn't the case in Valorant. And I don't think they'll design many agents like that either. So I don't really see the point of running a 6-man roster. It might help to have a 6-man on the roster, if someone's ill who can play, particularly if they're, like a good voice, who can help with kind of maybe becoming a bit of an assistant coach, like a Mind Freak. So yeah, like that is okay, but actually like swapping people in and out, probably not the case. Let's move on to this. It's funny, I'm getting people asking like what me typing H in my little Discord here, people asking like what is going on? What happened to Vitality? Oh dear. What happened to Vitality? Good question. Again, I said this on Plat Chat, like I'm a little bit worried that like Les and Durka still had okay games in their first game, and maybe by the time you're watching this, they played another game, and maybe they won that game, right? But I do think that it's a little bit worrying that Durka and Les actually did play pretty decently, and they still lost. Like Les and Durka did win them rounds, and they still lost to a team that, let's be real, probably isn't going to be amazing, even if they're okay. But like that's the team you got to be beating, really. So yeah, I don't think it's gonna go great for them. I think that the problem that they had was they, like again, if you just think about their whole roster, and I'm including coaching staff in this as well, right? It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to bring in a coach who hadn't been in tier 1 with a team that was expecting to win to win tournaments. You know what I mean? Like, that's just a tough spot to put a coach in. Because, if like Durka and Les disagree, and that's even true as well with like Safe IGLing, right? Like, Durka and Les and Safe are all going to have their own ideas based on their own experiences of how they think the game should be played. And the thing is, they're all going to think, even if they don't express it, right? Even if they just keep it to themselves. The point is, it still can be a problem. Even if they do just keep it to themselves. They're all going to maybe disagree with each other in terms of what the team is doing at a certain point in time. Add into a coach in that as well that, you know, hadn't been in tier 1 before. And you just end up with a bit of a muddle, I think, in terms of like how you've built your roster. And I would think, like, what would I have done if I was coaching that team? If I was coaching that team, what would I have done? I think the first thing you have to do, probably the first thing I would have done, I mean, I guess Trex was there at the start as well, who was also going to have his own ideas, is I probably would have gone to every single player and like had a one-on-one like conversation with them about what they think the best way of playing Valorant is. And I'd include Runner in that as well, of course. Like, and just get them to tell me what their view on the game is, right? And get it out all in the open. Don't say it in front of the team, because you might not want to say it in front of the team because you don't want to cause conflict, right? But tell me, what do you think your vision of the game is? And then try and stitch together, if we can, you know, a whole that everyone agrees with. And try and get that to come together. That might not have worked because, again, those personalities might be too strong to have made that work. Which, again, isn't anyone's particular fault, but, you know, it's just the way it is. So, yeah. I don't know. You could say that Vitality, it was always going to be doomed to an extent, right? Because even if you look at other teams, like, let's take Lev as an example, right? If you take Lev as an example, Lev is King's team. You know, like, even when Aspas is there, even when Calm, who's won champs, is coming in, but it's still King's team, right? Like, he's been there for a while. He's got respect on his name in and of himself, right? Everyone thinks he's a good player, right? So, and it's his org, right? Like, he's been there forever. So you don't come into his org and tell him what to do, right? Like, it's his team. So that is one reason, like, I think Lev, I know they didn't win anything, but they still came third in champs. And they did go through ups and downs, but that's why I think ultimately, you know, they stayed together. They kept the same team. And, you know, they did end up, you know, doing pretty well in champs, right? Like, so that, I think, is probably why that worked. Whereas in this case, whose team was it? Right? Whose team was Vitality, really? Safe would probably say it was his team, and he was trying to take on that responsibility. But it wasn't his org. You know, he didn't understand the org. He didn't understand, you know, he hadn't been there long enough to do that kind of stuff, even though he'd been there for a bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it probably just wasn't that clear, and that probably made it very difficult, I think, for everyone involved. But either way, let's move on to what should be our final question here. Yeah, I've been going for a little while here. I need to type in another H. In the case of Skye and Tejo, do you think that they should get cooldowns back on signature? Maybe change signature ability to get cooldown on those? I think they should. I think that, again, I'm not certain that this will happen, but I think it's probably something that Riot has considered. That by keeping all of the initiators at 40 seconds locked in, you're limiting yourself somewhat, right? And I understand why they want to do that, right? Because it keeps it simple, right? And it keeps it easier for new players to understand, like, hey, this is an initiator, they have a cooldown, whatever. However, we see with Deadlock's got a 40-second cooldown. Well, the other Sentinels have a 45-second cooldown. So what's going on there? Right? Is Deadlock an initiator now? Honestly, yes, kind of. But, you know, outside of that, like, that doesn't really make sense with the rest of the game. So I think, personally, if I was Riot, I would just say, it's kind of the same thing that they did when, like, the prices in Valorant all used to be to hundreds, and they changed that to 50s, right? The reason that they changed it to 50s because it gives you more opportunity to balance stuff. I think that the cooldown should be exactly the same, right? Like, eventually people will just get used to it, right? And if you're a new player, I don't think it's that crazy to like understand like, okay, this person gets a cooldown at 60 seconds and this one is at 40. I don't think that's that confusing personally, right? So, and the roles in Valorant, you know, aren't really hard and like if we were truly making roles for Valorant, right? Recon would probably be its own thing, separate from other initiators. You know, Sage and Deadlock would probably be their own thing, separate from other Sentinels. Like if you were really doing it, right, like the initiators who don't have a dash would probably be different to the other ones who do have kind of movement abilities, right? Like, you know, the roles are quite broad terms, you know, that don't make that much sense anyway, right? Like for instance, ISO, right? ISO doesn't get a shield back on kills, you know, like he used to, obviously, because that was too strong, right? But all the other duelists do. So what are we doing, right? Like, so yeah, I think it just makes sense. I think there's enough like different caveats for certain agents already that people will just get used to. And I think it just gives you an easier way of balancing initiators, right? Like, hey, Silver and Fade are quite good, right? Or for instance, let's say that like one of Silver or Fade was like clearly better than the other, which at certain points in the game people have thought, right? Now we're sitting at a time where maybe that isn't the case, but back, you know, at different points people have thought that. Well, it would make sense like, okay, well, what if your cooldown is 5 seconds? Like if we think Silver is clearly better than Fade, well, Silver has a 5 second longer cooldown than Fade, right? And that's a way that we balance those agents, right? It just gives you more levers to play with. And I think particularly for agents like Tejo and Skye, like would a 60, 70 second cooldown, you know, would that work for them? Yeah, maybe. And then they might become interesting agents in certain like ways that they work, right? Like you then know, like if you're playing against a Tejo comp and Tejo has a 70 second cooldown, you probably know like, okay, they're going to play pretty slow, right? Because they're going to want those extra, you know, they're not going to be doing a bunch of fast hits off the rip because they're going to want those tail missiles back for, you know, the post plan, right? So you can know that, right? And you can build a game plan around it. Like, hey, they're playing Tejo, but we know that, you know, that's not going to be an issue. They're not going to run a ton of fast hits because it doesn't make sense, right? So, and that's obviously a negative of playing something like that. And yeah, you can go for them, but then you don't get the second missiles, right? So, like, I think that, yeah, it just makes sense. It's just give yourself an extra lever to balance these agents. It just to me, it seems so obvious that they should do that, but maybe they will, maybe they won't. Who knows? We'll find out probably in the off season, if I had to guess, because that's generally when they make these big changes. So yeah, that I think is that. Again, thank you if you asked a question. I hope this at least was somewhat bearable to watch. If you've made it to this point in the video, honestly, ask yourself, like, have you had a productive day? Have you had a productive day? That's all I'm going to say. But thanks for watching, and yeah, subscribe to the Ascent channel for more of this kind of bizarre stuff. We'll be watching Stage 2, of course, and have a nice day, everyone.